Hey guys, it's Ashley Francis, the holistic psychotherapist with Blue Sage Counseling and Wellness. And today we're going to be talking about the anxious attachment style. So this is one video within a series. If you're interested in checking out the other videos in this series, the links are in the comments section below, and you can learn about what attachment style and attachment theory is, as well as the other types of attachment styles as well. So today we're going to be talking about the anxious attachment style. Let's go ahead and jump in. I want to give a disclaimer as we go through all of these attachment styles that these are not mental health disorders, and these are just labels of being able to understand how we relate with other people, how we relate with our caregivers, and how we relate with partners in our relationships. So I always want to tell people to take this with a grain of salt, because this is really for informational purposes. Try not to get too overwhelmed with the labels of all this and what this all means and feeling as though, gosh, I've got this anxious attachment style and it's just not going to get any better, because that's just simply not true. Use this as informational purposes only to understand yourself better, but also please, please, please understand that there is help and these things can change. These are different from disorders. Sometimes disorders are really hard to make progress. So this is different from that. Let's go ahead and get started. We're going to talk about some of the characteristics of an anxiously attached child, some characteristics of a parent with an anxiously attached child. And then we're also going to talk about the characteristics of an anxiously attached adult. And then finally, we will also talk about some of the things that you can do right now to start building a new secure attachment. Let's just run through some of the characteristics of the anxiously attached child. Also, another disclaimer, this is different from just regular anxiety. So most people, if not all people, experience anxiety at some point or another. This needs to be distinguished from an attachment style. So we may have just run-of-the-mill anxiety, which is tension and stress and preoccupation with the future and worst case scenario thinking. That is more of what anxiety is, but the attachment style more has to do with how we relate to our caregivers and our partners in relationships. So that's the distinction here. Okay, so the anxiously attached child often feels drained due to the caregiver's neediness. Also, another disclaimer, I'm full of them today. But this stuff is important because it's important to have these distinctions to not have misconceptions and confusion. Oftentimes you will hear people use the word parent in the context of talking about attachment. I personally don't think that that's a good idea, because not everybody was raised by their parents. They were raised by caregivers or their grandparents or friends or family, or maybe they were even adopted. So when we say parents, I feel like that's kind of limiting. It's more proper to say caregivers. So that's what we'll focus on. Okay, so they also tend to worry about their caregiver and cling to them. They can also feel guilty and feeling as though they need to take care of the caregiver. They feel like they're more responsible for the caregiver than the caregiver is of themselves. They're anxious while they're away from the caregiver, and they are hard to console when they return. So they're an anxious mess when that caregiver is not physically there. And even when the caregiver comes back, it's really hard for that child to be able to regulate their emotions. They just don't have a sense of security in knowing that when they leave that they're going to actually come back. Other things are that they explore less than children their own age. They appear generally anxious. They don't interact with strangers. Now, this is different from your traditional stranger danger, which is a healthy thing. We do want to be suspicious and cautious of people we don't know, but this is more along the lines of, I don't trust anybody. I won't smile or look at anybody that is not a family member. I will not have interactions with anybody that I don't know and feel like I can trust at all. They have problems regulating and controlling negative emotions. So this is the child that has a tendency to have tantrums for very long periods of time. They happen very often. The child just does not have the skills to be able to self-regulate and to be able to hear the message that it's going to be okay. The brain just doesn't register that message, and it just stays in that chronic fight or flight state, displaying aggressive behavior and poor peer interactions. So this one also needs to kind of be taken with a grain of salt, because it can be a symptom of something else, but in conjunction with other symptoms, this could be one of them. So risk factors are early separation from a caregiver, if there is abuse or neglect, or if the caregivers ridiculed the child when the child was in distress. These are all things that don't provide safety and stability for the child. It doesn't provide predictability and can lead to an anxious attachment. Now, keep in mind that more often than not, in cases where there has been extreme neglect and extreme abuse, that child is actually more inclined to develop an avoidant attachment style, but they can also develop an anxious attachment style as well. So the characteristics of parents of children with anxious attachment style, surprise, surprise, they often have the anxious attachment style themselves. And guess where that came from? It came from their parents, and then it came from their parents. So this is an intergenerational thing. We see that very commonly, and that makes it even more difficult to be able to break until one of the family members says, you know what? I'm tired of this. I don't want to live this way. I see my parents going through the same thing. I saw their parents going through the same thing. I'm not going to do this the same way, so I'm going to start doing things differently. But that is a hallmark of the characteristics in parents. The biggest thing that characterizes a parent with a child that has an anxious attachment is inconsistent parenting. By and large, that's what we see. So this parent is either overparenting or they are underparenting. Oftentimes they can do a flip-flop of both. There are times where they seem to be appropriately providing for the child and attending to their needs. So there are periods where there is healthy attachment going on, but it is not consistent. This parent will flip-flop. And the interactions are unpredictable. The child doesn't know what version of the caregiver that they're going to get that day. So it makes it very stressful and very confusing for that child. Another hallmark of these types of parents is that they seek emotional and physical closeness with their child as a means of satisfying their own needs. So a good example of this is a parent that plans an elaborate birthday party for their child, and they go all out, they get all gussied up, and they buy all of these things and invite so many people. And all the while, the child didn't even really want all of that. In fact, the child probably wasn't even asked if that is what they wanted. The parent just kind of took it upon themselves to do all of these things and take charge, because really it's coming from more of a self-centered place. They're doing it to satisfy their own needs for love, primarily for attention, and that can leave the child feeling very drained and very confused, and also just not feeling good worth that I can tell that this really wasn't about me. It was more so about you. Oftentimes it takes the child a little while, of course getting a little older, to be able to realize that, but once they do, they do. And this can also come in the form of being intrusive or overprotective. They have the appearance of being a perfect parent. So these are some other ways that this can manifest as well. And now we want to talk about the characteristics in adulthood, anxious attachment in adulthood. So this type of person thinks highly of other people, but they don't think very highly of themselves. They typically do have low self-esteem. They have a strong fear of rejection and abandonment. This can cause jealousy and also cause this person to be suspicious of their partners. There's clinginess in the relationship. There is a preoccupation with the relationship. When the person is not with their partner, they're constantly thinking about them, or they constantly have worries. What are they thinking? Is this going to last? Are they having doubts? They're primarily focused on the wants and needs of their partner instead of being able to take a step back and ask themselves, how do I feel about this? Next is that they're sensitive, and they have a strong sense of other needs, but are often insecure and anxious about their own worth in relationships. So this is just another rephrase of what we just said. They need constant reassurance, and that they are loved and cared about, and that they are worthy and good enough. So this is the partner that is consistently asking their partner, do you love me? Is this something that is going to last? Are you only with me? Why are you with me? I don't understand why you're with me. Why do you love someone like me? So those are good examples of how that anxiously attached person needs that constant reassurance. Are you going to call me? Are you going to be there? Otherwise, it can really activate that fear of abandonment and rejection, and it can cause panic, full out panic. They're afraid of or incapable of being alone. When they're alone, it means that they are left alone to think. And because they are not able to regulate their emotions very well, it can cause that panic. And then it leads back into that pattern of seeking reassurance it could be from friends or it could be from family, but most primarily it comes from their partner. So if they're alone, then that is grounds for a lot of emotions getting out of control. They seek intimacy and closeness, but they're also highly dependent on others for those types of things. So they don't often seek within themselves self-soothing types of things to be able to feel better and to channel and even accessing their own emotions. They're so overly focused on other people. And then often the presence of the loved one is the remedy for the fears and insecurities. So their minds maybe go crazy about these insecurities and fears, but as soon as they talk to their partner or see their partner, that stuff just immediately goes away. Immediately. So yeah, that's a good characteristic as well. So let's talk about some practical, tactical tools to use to develop a more secure attachment. So one of the things that you want to do is to keep developing the things that you're good at and get into a flow state. So this is, it's good on two prongs. One is that it's bolstering your confidence and self-esteem because it's already something that you're good at. And then number two, it's also good because when you're able to zone out, you're less preoccupied, which is also another name for this attachment style. You're less preoccupied with other things. You're more focused on something that you're enjoying, something that you're good at, and you're not thinking about your partner or other people or the needs of other people. The next thing is to take some measured risks. Nothing too crazy, but this is a good way to get out of your comfort zone and once again to also build some confidence and to prove to yourself that you can do more than you think you are capable of. So this may be things like talking to a stranger. Start small. Getting physically strong, because this translates to becoming mentally strong. There again, if we're able to prove to ourselves that we can do hard things, if I can do this hard thing, then I can do other hard things as well. Seek a relationship with a securely attached individual. So sometimes these things can literally clean up on their own because an anxiously attached person found a securely attached person who is in control of their emotions, who sets good boundaries and isn't afraid to speak up for themselves. And as they do that, they have very little tolerance for some of the neediness or the clinginess of the anxiously attached partner. And if the anxiously attached partner can hang in, actually if both partners can hang in long enough to benefit and learn from one another, you start to notice that the anxiously attached person starts to just simply calm down because they can see that there's no reason to be quote unquote freaking out. Okay, and the last thing is to seek therapy. So obviously this is my top recommendation and the most effective, because really what you want to do is increase awareness. Where did this all come from? First, you want to start with how is it really showing up in your relationships, your current relationships, even with your friends, your colleagues. These things can show up in a variety of places, but more often than not, they're going to show up in your romantic relationships because those are extensions of relationships from childhood. But nonetheless, it's getting that awareness of what exactly is going on in your current life and in your current relationships, perhaps in ways that you didn't even realize. And then the second is to tie it back to the events and behaviors and patterns from childhood to understand where this all comes from, to really put the link together of how intergenerational this really does tend to be. And just being able to tap into that acknowledgement is really healing in and of itself. And then you and your therapist can start to put together a very tailored or specifically tailored treatment plan to you and your needs. And you can start feeling better very quickly. However, I also want to say too that it can be very difficult to be consistent with this, and it can take a long time. You can start feeling better pretty quickly, but it can take a long time to see some definitive results and to really sustain it. So lastly, I just want to spend a few minutes touching on how to parent a child with anxious attachment, particularly if you have an adopted child or it's a child that is not blood that you are raising and you notice that they have an anxious attachment style. The biggest thing by and large what you can do is to show that child that you are reliably meeting their needs. There's a big misconception out there that there are types of parenting practices that are better being able to establish and sustain that secure attachment. And some examples, they are natural childbirth, co-sleeping, breastfeeding. Those things absolutely help with developing a secure attachment, but the research just simply does not show that it's those specific things that make a secure attachment. What it shows is that the more reliable and consistent and predictable that you are in a healthy way is more likely to establish and sustain that secure attachment with your child. And this also goes for biological children too. It's really about establishing a balance between freedom and guidance, so that child understands that they are free to explore and make their own mistakes, but they also know that they can come back to you when they need guidance after they've made those mistakes. So that's really the goal of what we are shooting for, is that balance between freedom and guidance, and just focusing on yourself, figuring out what are your needs. Are you going through your child or other people to satisfy your own needs? And therapy can help with that. That can be a little hard to uncover. And then, of course, seeking professional help. You can either have your child go into individual therapy, but personally, I believe that having family therapy is the best way to go, because it's going to help both of you learn more about yourselves, where things come from, and then also to put together some very effective interventions that can be very, very effective. That is today's talk on the anxious attachment style. If you like this video, please let me know in the comments below. If you want to see more videos like this, I'd love to hear your suggestions. Give it a thumbs up. Also subscribe to our channel to see more videos like this, and I'll see you real soon.